That widow was no bad girl. Most of you have heard of the St. Mark's women's group called the Bad Girls of the Bible. They started with a book of that title, a book that examines the stories of the strong and sometimes misunderstood women of the Bible. And these women of St. Mark's have continued on now for some years as a study group. Well, in today's text from Mark's Gospel, a widow gives 2 small coins to the temple treasury while Jesus watches. But I don't think she was a bad girl of the Bible. If she had been, the story would be different. This text about the widow's donation comes right after words of Jesus condemning religious leaders who cheat widows out of their money. And this is no accidental placement. This is all one narrative in Mark's Gospel. Countless preachers have used this woman as an example of faithful giving. I've done that. And I really do believe in generous giving to the church. Please, pledge to St. Mark's for 2016. If you've already done so, thank you very much. But I now realize I have missed something in this particular story. I've been studying the Gospels all my adult life, but I learned something new this week while I was studying this text. I don't know why I never saw this before. The God of Jesus is the protector of the poorest and weakest of society. I did know that. And I also know that clergy betray God when they use religion to enrich themselves personally or to enrich their religious institutions by impoverishing people. But this widow's story hit me in a new way this week. Now I see that Jesus is not actually praising this woman for her generous giving. Instead, he is lamenting the way she is the victim of the greed of a religious system. In effect, Jesus says, there's the tragedy of today. This poor widow, she put in her whole living, everything she had to live on. Now, she's been taught by religious leaders to give this way. But Jesus condemns the system that motivates her action. And he condemns the people who conditioned her to do this. Just think about all those TV evangelists we've heard about who convinced their followers to give their last dime to these already rich and bloated media ministries. The text says that Jesus sat down opposite the temple treasury. And I realize now Mark used that word opposite on purpose. Jesus is opposite. Jesus is opposed to making people purchase access to God. That's why he overturned the tables of the temple money changers. You cannot buy and sell access to God, he says. This is a house of prayer for all people and is to be free and open to all. Now, the generosity of this widow may be good in itself, but it does also support the devouring greed of that temple system. The religious leaders who are supposed to be protecting this woman instead leave her penniless. Sadly, she cooperates with her own exploitation. She might not see it that way, but that's what she does. And I have read that this is really kind of common in situations of oppression. Throughout history, people have often been convinced that dictators are really their helpers. Dictatorial rulers in government, in religion, in education, in the military, in any other human system often try this scam. But Jesus sees through it all. And Jesus speaks against this, and eventually it gets Jesus killed. But let me tell you about another widow. And this one is a true bad girl, and I mean that as a compliment. A writer from the 1940s out in the Midwest had this anecdote in one of his books from that time. A widow in Chicago lives with her young son in a very poor apartment in a poor neighborhood. The boy goes to a Catholic school. One day, the priest tells this boy that he needs $5 to say Mass for the boy's deceased father. If Mass is not said for him, the priest tells the boy, his father will never see God's face. The boy is very upset. He goes home and with tears in his eyes begs his mother, Dad, we'll never see God's face if we don't have a Mass said. Well, the widow gives her son the $5. The boy gives it to the priest. The priest says the Mass. Some days later, the priest tells the boy the same thing again. His deceased father will never see God's face unless more Masses are said. The distraught boy goes home and begs his mother for another $5. He says, if we don't do it, Dad will never see God's face. This time, the widow holds her ground and she says, then let him look at God's backside. Now that woman is like Jesus. She knows what this priest was trying to pull. She could qualify as a bad girl of the Bible, I think, and I mean that as a compliment. She says what Jesus says. God is on the side of the poor. As the Magnificat puts it, God lifts up the lowly. Access to God is not for sale, not by any priest, not by any temple, not by anybody. Now, I've missed that interpretation of this story in Mark's gospel all these years. I don't know how. I should have seen it. I mean, anytime I read the gospels through, I see that Jesus is on the side of the poor and the underdog and the oppressed. It's one reason I love him so much. I like following this rebel. I like following this dangerous man who challenges all human authority, even religious authority. I like following this subversive rabbi who loves everybody, but also has a special place in his heart for the neediest. Of course, like all the followers of Jesus around the world, I have a long way to go to catch up to him. I am usually on the safe and the sane side of the street, not the rebellious and subversive side. But I hope I can make some progress. And I hope you can too. Let's be rabble Jesus rouses. Let's adopt his policies. Let's be bad girls and bad boys of his Bible. Amen.